Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com. Ozcast.
Hello world, I'm John Bruni and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. Today we'll take a little break from the global catastrophe of the moment, the dreaded coronavirus, and look at the mess that surrounds the Syrian city of Idlib. The only thing that stands in the way of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's reconquest of his country, a country torn by 9 years of civil war, is the final rebel holdout city of Idlib to the country's north. Idlib has withstood multiple assaults from the Russian-backed Syrian army. But continued fighting has exacerbated Syria's refugee crisis, with many refugees continuing to head into neighboring Turkey. Turkey has over 3 million Syrian refugees on its territory. The government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, concerned about Syrian Kurdish aspirations throughout northern Syria, as well as the stream of refugees, first decided to intervene in the Syrian civil war to stabilize the region in 2016. However, in the hotly contested close-quarter battle space, this placed Turkish forces perilously close to the Syrian army besieging Idlib. The problem this poses is complex for the balance of power inside Syria, as well as for the victims of violence within Idlib itself, who have no control over external circumstances. Russian President Vladimir Putin has reached out to Turkish President Erdogan in a tactical détente, building Turkey a nuclear reactor, selling Turkey its much-vaunted S-400 surface-to-air missile system, and helping the Turks with their gas pipeline ambitions. The Russo-Turkish relationship has vexed Ankara's ties to Europe generally and to NATO in particular. Russia is backing Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, Turkey's enemy. Russia is also actively assisting the Iranian theocracy, a sectarian ally of the Assad regime and a regional rival of Turkey. The Syrian army attack on Turkish soldiers inside Syria in late February and Turkey's retaliation in early March signaled the limits of Putin's gamesmanship. It has negatively impacted Russia's project on bringing historic enemy Turkey into its orbit. A ceasefire is now in effect, but questions remain on how long it will last, and if fighting breaks out, how this will continue to affect Russo-Turkish relations. Joining us in the studio today is co-host David Olney. Unfortunately, Tim is unable to be with us today, so David and I will be flying solo on this one. Let's hope the technology works out okay. And from the United States, we are joined by SIA's Middle East expert, Dr. Imad Harb. Imad is also Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au. Imad, welcome back to Strategicon.
Thank you.
Imad, in late February, 33 Turkish soldiers were killed by the Syrian army. Can you give our listeners a brief synopsis on what is going on around the city of Idlib in Syria?
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to explain what's going on, if I can. Unfortunately,
if you can't,
the Syrian situation
trouble.
is... Yeah, I know. The Syrian situation is a very, very complicated issue. But at any rate, this is basically the battle for Idlib is basically the culmination of the Syrian civil war. I mean, the Syrian civil war just entered its 10th year, and only Idlib and its countryside by the Turkish border is still outside of the Syrian regime's control. So Bashar al-Assad has decided that, with all these retreats that the opposition has suffered, and now comes the time when I take over Idlib. And the Syrian opposition has thought about this, that this is coming anyway. I mean, it's been coming since 2016, 2017, when the regime started to score really major victories on the battlefield against the opposition. So now Idlib is the last bastion, so to speak, of that opposition. And the issue is Idlib is no longer a Syrian affair, only a Syrian affair. It is a Russian affair, a Turkish affair, a Syrian affair, and an Arab affair. So in December, the regime in full force started attacking the province and actually entered the borders, so to speak. And immediately the regime ran into the opposition of Turkish forces that have been deployed in the province in accordance with the Astana and Sochi agreements that were reached in 2018 and later on early 2019, according to which the Turks would basically deploy observation posts inside that territory on the borders between the opposition-held area and the Syrian regime areas. And there will be, at the time, they decided that there would be joint patrols between Russian forces and Turkish forces along this border to just maintain a ceasefire. But at any rate, the ceasefire was really hardly holding. There was always skirmishes and battles across the border. And finally, the Syrian regime decided to just try to take it over. And that's when things really escalated between the Syrian regime forces and Turkish forces, which culminated at the end of February in the killing of the Turkish soldiers. The situation is still fluid, although the Turks and the Russians reached a ceasefire agreement to which, interestingly, the Syrian regime was not a party. In other words, they were not at the negotiating table. They did not participate in negotiating for that ceasefire. And so basically Russia took over decision-making for the Syrian regime and decided on a ceasefire, according to which the territory itself, there is a major highway that runs through the territory between a regime stronghold called Ladiqiya on the Mediterranean coast and Aleppo. It's called the M4 highway. And they decided that there will be some sort of a safe zone, so to speak, around this 6 miles each way, 10 kilometers either way of the highway, which would be patrolled by joint Turkish and Russian soldiers also. So the situation is still, it's holding, the ceasefire is holding, although there are some violations of the ceasefire. But in general, it is holding. The question, as far as I'm concerned, as far as all observers are concerned, is when does the ceasefire really collapse? Because the Syrian regime refuses to accept this as basically a fait accompli, because it would be accepting the opposition to stay outside of its control, or rather Idlib to stay outside its control, and it doesn't want to do that. So right now, for Russian and Turkish reasons, specifically not Syrian reasons, the ceasefire is holding, but I don't think that it will hold for long.
Imad, with regard to how the Russians are positioning themselves here, David and I, we just came in from having a cup of coffee, because, of course, this morning was one of those mornings where I did not caffeinate, so I needed to get my bit of Ethiopian coffee into me. So anyway, we were having this chat, and, the thing that really came out of it was, well, okay, the Russians are playing a spoiler region in the Middle East. But then again, it's also creating a sort of house of cards diplomacy as well, where it's trying to placate the Turks on the one side, the Iranians on the other, the Syrian government. I mean, how sustainable is this? I mean, at what point does this whole house of cards come tumbling down for Putin?
Our assessment was it can't stay. They can't just keep playing cards. At some point, the Russians have to run out of resources or opportunities, and then everyone's sort of left with messes created by Putin and the Russians.
I agree with what David just said. The Russians do not really have a very long rope to really extend to the Syrian regime, to the Turks, and to the opposition. The Russians don't have the resources to really maintain themselves forever in the place, and to maintain themselves as basically the policemen for the situation. It's going to take a lot of pressure from the Russians for the Syrians and the Turks to really keep it quiet. So, but at the same time, Russia is, no matter how we really look at it, Russia has succeeded in some really important respects, not only in Syria but also in opening channels to North Africa and Libya, to Egypt, to the Gulf countries, to Iraq. So the Russians are playing for an extended strategic role in the Arab world, in the Eastern Mediterranean at least. And Syria provides them with a basis for that specific role. Yes, they don't have the resources, and probably because they don't have the resources, like the United States, for instance, they would use the blunt military instrument to maintain a control. So because they cannot be an economic hegemon, so the only way they can do it is by opening up diplomatic channels a little bit with some countries, but at the same time specifically insisting on a military, I don't know if we should call it a victory, but yes, it approaches a victory, but it's not quite a victory because the victorious really usually gain a whole lot. They're not gaining a whole lot. The only thing they're gaining is to make sure that they have a foothold in Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean. But yet at the same time, we also have to remember that having a foothold in Syria is, no matter what anybody says, is also a challenge to Iran. And Iran is also a channel to Russia and Syria. So the Russians are trying to maintain themselves as the final arbiters, but yet at the same time, they are afraid that they might lose that arbitration, that dominant position, specifically because they don't have the wherewithal, the economic wherewithal to really be the hegemon and thus kick out everybody else.
With regard to Russia, though, I mean, they only need to be unlucky once, because ultimately the sort of game of house of cards diplomacy that they're playing is extraordinarily risky for the Russian state. And as you rightly point out, Russia doesn't have the resources necessary to maintain itself for the long term in this kind of position. So what do you think of the idea that, they just need to trip up once, maybe in Syria, maybe in Libya, maybe somewhere else, and then the whole thing just comes down and Russia does not come out of it looking well, and Putin's job might very well be on the line because of his foreign policy?
Well, two important things here. I'll start with the second one first. I personally do not think that Putin's job is on the line, honestly. I think that he has already secured for himself many, many years in office. I don't think that the Russian state is... I think he has already made the Russian state into his own image. I doubt that the Russian state has institutions that really can challenge his permanence in office, so to speak. On the other hand, he may slip. Of course, he may slip. The problem is when in strategic considerations, when a state slips, it's because there has to be another state to really gain from that slip. The problem in the Middle East, in Syria specifically, is the counterweight to the Russian situation, to the Russian position, is not there. In other words, the United States is absent from Syria. So if Russia slips in Syria, or even in Libya, it doesn't. I don't see it as something that is going to be truly final or really catastrophic, because the United States is not there to pick up from a Russian slip. Egypt cannot do it in Turkey. Egypt also does not have the resources. Turkey may be able to dither here and there, work a little bit, try to establish certain conditions, conducive conditions to its interests in northern Syria. But that's about all. Turkey also is trying to play it safe with Putin, but yet at the same time, it really cannot play it any more dangerously than Erdogan is doing now. So the point, my whole point is, the slips of different weak parties do not necessarily mean a fatal blow to their positions or interests in Syria or elsewhere. It's specifically because the United States is not there to pick up the pieces if they slip, or to exploit the situation if they slip. Remember, the United States is ready to leave Syria anytime President Trump is allowed to do so, because the Pentagon always keeps pushing back against withdrawing from there, or from Iraq for that matter. And the Trump administration is not really ready to go into North Africa to really, exploit a Russian slip in Libya, for instance. So that's the thing. I mean, yes, he might slip, but that is not going to mean that he might lose.
It's almost the same in Venezuela. The Russians are able to have influence because the Americans aren't willing to get involved. So both of these things, to an extent, are really good opportunities to take advantage of opportunities, but if they don't work, no one really wants to deal with the mess. And it's not the Baltic states, so it's not the Russians' front line. These are all just, These are adventures that if they turn into misadventures, they're still not the front line in Russian terms for Russian identity or, their role in Eurasia.
I agree. I fully agree. It's not. They are working on the far abroad instead of the near abroad. In other words, in Syria and in Libya and in Venezuela, this is not specifically. It's not Georgia. It's not Abkhazia. It's not Chechnya. I mean, it's you keep these people. You keep the world wondering about the Russian role here and there and everywhere, but not the Russian role in Ukraine, for instance. When was the last time we heard anything about Ukraine except for the Trump scandal in Ukraine? I mean, but everybody has left Russia in eastern Ukraine, and now they're talking about Russia in Libya and Syria. So yes, you're right. I do agree with that.
It's like wiggling your toe in front of a snapping turtle. You might lose a toe, but you'll catch the turtle.
Exactly, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of this whole notion of Sean McFate's durable disorder. I mean, we're seeing this now play out as part of Russian foreign policy. So we're not going to be seeing any clear-cut victories, but we will continue to see this constant disruption. Whether or not the ebb and flow will be in favor of Moscow is kind of irrelevant to the idea of Moscow just having a presence on the ground, right?
And maintaining competence on the ground.
Yeah, precisely. That's the thing. It's like, you occupy everybody with the belief that, the Russians are coming, but the Russians don't have much to come with. Simply because they play a role simply because nobody else played that role. So they said, okay, we'll try, and nobody objected. When the Russians started bombing Syria in September of 2015, the Obama administration hardly said anything. I mean, President Obama said, well, they're getting into a quagmire. I mean, well, as far as Putin is concerned, he doesn't really care. He's not into a quagmire. I mean, he flies a few airplanes there. He dispatches, 5,000-6,000 soldiers to Syria. But that's not really that big of a deal. I mean, it's the same thing in Libya. I mean, he's not necessarily investing the Russian state's capabilities in Libya. He's just throwing this here and there so people can be afraid of him without necessarily him being really so fearful.
It's very good signaling. And do just enough to signal, what are they doing? But don't look at like you said, don't look at the reality that Ukraine, we've completely forgotten about, and there he's pretty much got most things he wanted.
Right, exactly. I mean, Abkhazia. I mean, he established a rump state in Georgia, and in Chechnya, people are can't go out in the streets still, but he still can claim to have been victorious there, and that's right next door.
See, I'm not so convinced that Putin will get away with this whole situation scot-free. I think that the Russian people themselves are starting to see, or at least starting to mobilize and push back against Putin and the apparatchiks that run the Kremlin. Obviously not in an organized manner insofar as Putin is fearful for his for the safety of himself and his cohorts, but certainly there is this lacking of legitimacy feeling that the Russian opposition has been actually quite successful in portraying Putin as not necessarily good for Russia's long-term interests. Putin obviously has got the political institutions under him, and he's manipulating them very, very well. And of course, only recently we heard that there might be another change to the Russian constitution allowing him to sit in office until 2036 or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And if that's the case, well, okay, he can do that, but only at the sufferance of the Russian people themselves. Arguably, when people come home in body bags from a misstep or a mishap, whether it be in the Middle East, which is really, yes, you're right, it's a far removed theater of combat for Russian forces, but also in the minds of some Russians, a pretty irrelevant one at that. I mean, it's not like, defending the near abroad, which can be justified by an autocracy like Putin's. When you talk about...
Yeah, you're right. I agree. We should not really discount the fact that a Russian opposition will say something and will do something that is going to hurt Putin or his chances or whatever it is. Because, after all, we looked at Hosni Mubarak as the Sphinx who was never going to be changed. He's going to die in office, and yet he was toppled. Yes, there is nothing final about this, obviously. But the thing is, right now he has the state and he has society, he has the economy, for crying out loud, in his grip. Yes, the Russian opposition is saying something, but specifically when the Russian opposition says something, all of a sudden they're thrown in jail. So,
and it's mainly us in the West who listen.
He's playing it very, very hard. That doesn't mean that he's also always going to win it, but he's really in a very, very tough position. Position for him. He's in a very strong position inside Russia.
So if we turn our attention to Ankara and the way that the Turkish government has been handling the situation, we know that from a military perspective, the Turkish have invested heavily in their own domestic military-industrial complex, which is actually quite sophisticated by regional regions, and probably born of the fact that, Turkey has been a long-time NATO member. But in the end, what about Erdogan, and how do you think he can continue using his blunt instrument to affect what he believes is Turkey's national interest over the border in Syria?
Because the first thing here I think that's really important is the difference is he's having to play at home and near home. So everything is for keeps, and the Turkish population are aware this directly affects them because of refugee flows. And the neighborhood understands the destabilizing force he represents.
Yeah, listen, no head of state really is totally free to do whatever they want to do. We know that for sure. The thing with Erdogan is he takes a move, he takes a step, and then if he withdraws, if he goes back, if he retreats, then he's going to be called, you lost or whatever. He doesn't want to admit the defeat. So he takes another step, although the first step didn't really do very much for him. In other words, it's almost like what I call, running away forward. You get yourself into more trouble because you're running away from old troubles. So, Erdogan, when Erdogan was at the peak of his popularity and peak of his successes, and at least, his party, the AKP party, the Justice and Development, has been in control since 2002. And for that party to really find that, two leaders of the party established two separate different political parties that are similar to AKP. So, in other words, his own political base is getting weaker specifically because of sometimes people call it adventurism in Syria. Yes, most of the time, actually, the biggest objection to his policies today is what is he doing in Syria and how long can we take 3.5 million refugees inside Syria, inside Turkey. So he has made some wrong moves. The problem with him is he does not want to admit that these wrong moves are specifically what is weakening Turkey in, vis-a-vis Bashar al-Assad, vis-a-vis Putin, vis-a-vis Iran, for goodness sake. So he does not want to admit that. No authoritarian leader wants to admit that he made a mistake. So Turkey is in a tough spot. Turkey wants to establish some sort of a security zone along its southern border with Syria. And it wants to make sure that the Syrian Kurds do not have much power to challenge the state and do not have much power actually to support their brethren across the border inside Turkey. So, he's trying his best to try to maintain that. And it is a very, very tough act. It's very, very tough to try to do all of this. And everybody, Russia, the Arab states, and Syria, all of them are counting on the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, to try to make Erdogan understand that he is really playing a very weak hand across in northern Syria. So it's very tough for him. It's really extremely tough for him, especially also that domestically speaking, his opponents, almost all universally, all his opponents are against what he is doing in Syria. They believe that what he is doing in Syria is supporting extremist religious forces. They think that the presence of 3.5 million Syrian refugees inside Turkey is a national security threat and a social threat at the same time. So remember, all of these people are really European oriented. They like Europe, they like the West, they like all that. So they're not going to be very, very happy with with Erdogan's trying to reestablish the old Ottoman Empire, the old Ottoman, everybody calls him the Sultan. So I don't think that this is really going to be very well accepted in Turkish society. And all of these things are combining to really weaken his position in Syria.
So he really desperately needs a win at some point to shore up his legitimacy, right?
He definitely needs that win. What all he can count on right now, as far as I'm concerned, all he can count on are two very important factors. One, a political base, that the core of the Justice and the AKP party, the core of that party stays with him. The other one is that he has secured the loyalty of the military brass. So in other words, he does not necessarily have a whole lot of challenge from these two core groups. It remains to be seen, obviously, how long the army will stay with him and all that stuff. But yet, at the same time, he can be assured of this stuff. But for him to be truly legitimate is for him to also, at the same time, allow for not forget that Turkey is part of NATO. Turkey is originally took its direction into the West. It wants to be a Western country, and the Turkish society wants to be a Western society. And he can't stand up to somebody like Putin. He really cannot stand up to somebody although his economy is probably on a better footing than Putin's economy. But Putin doesn't care about about Erdogan's fortunes, political or otherwise.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, if we're looking at the various strengths of the economies, Iran is highly dependent on the export of gas to Turkey. So
Right.
that kind of relationship is going to be put under a great deal of strain, considering the fact that the Iranian mullahs will want Assad to win over Idlib. And so Assad basically has full control over the country because it's been backing the Assad regime. How do you think the economic relationship between Turkey and Iran will play out over Syria?
It's really tough. For one thing, Iran does not necessarily survive off of the gas exports it does sends to Turkey or to Europe through Turkey. Iran has an ideological battle to win, and that ideological battle takes it from Tehran all the way to Beirut, including Syria, and it wants to give Bashar al-Assad as much of as many winnings as he can get, as many victories as he can get. So, but yet at the same time, it only has in the Middle East itself, it only has Syria, Iraq, part of Lebanon, not necessarily all of it, and Turkey as friends. Everybody else doesn't necessarily really like the Iranian regime or wants to cooperate with it. So it really is playing a very bad, bad hand, so to speak, in the region. But yet at the same time, it wants to have that special relationship with Turkey because Turkey represents also another factor. It's a different religious factor. Turkey is a Sunni country. Iran is a Shia country. So by that, it can just maybe win the propaganda war that, hey, we are not only Shia, we are also working for Islamic solidarity and have good friends with Turkey. So Iran is trying to balance a whole bunch of things at the same time. I personally believe that Iran does not have the same challenge in Turkey as it has a challenge in Russia. I think the Russian challenge to Iran in Syria is way, way more important and more dangerous for Iranian interests than the Turkish challenge. Turkey does not want to control Syria, all of it. Turkey wants to have its interests and its security, so to speak, guaranteed in northern Syria, and that's all Erdogan wants. He doesn't care about anything else. He doesn't want to go and occupy Damascus and take over the Syrian government. But Iran does. Iran wants Syria for itself. Putin is not going to let that happen. I mean, this is why I'm saying, Turkey does not represent to Iran the same danger that Russia represents.
So with regard to Turkey and its ongoing relations with Russia, we've seen that the Turks are going to be buying the S-400 surface-to-air missile battery, which has really angered a lot of the of Turkey's NATO members. Then we've got the so-called Turk Stream pipeline that the Russians and the Turks are cooperating on, as well as a possible nuclear power plant that the Russians will be building within Turkey. Obviously, that really does mix things up quite significantly for the Turks at a time when Turkey doesn't really have a great deal of friends. It can't leverage off the Europeans because obviously Erdogan's incautious comments with regard to refugees and where they might be flowing.
He antagonized everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you think that is going to be the thing that sort of undercuts Erdogan even further from whatever he thinks he may have? The reality is quite significantly different in terms of he is a friendless figure.
Yeah, that Russia becomes the friend of last resort.
Right.
Yeah, this is as far as I'm concerned, it's a Faustian. He had a Faustian bargain with Putin. He just simply decided, okay, how am I going to address the issue of shooting down that Russian airplane? And Putin got everything he wanted from him after that shooting down of the plane, specifically because, it has many factors, but importantly is that Erdogan played his cards wrong with the European Union. when he played his cards wrong with the European Union, demanded way too much from the European Union, way too much for the European to pay anyway, he started, toying with the issue of Russia and Putin. Endangering his relationships with Europe also meant that he is endangering his relationship with NATO members, specifically also the United States and Germany. So, this is why I'm saying it's a Faustian thing. When you want to just do something, so maybe Putin will not be so mad at you, but endanger the most important allies that you ever had. Your relationship with all these important allies. I mean, why did he do that? I mean, is it because he just felt that he wasn't being dealt fairly with by the Europeans or the United States? And then he went and stuck the United States, stuck his thumb in the United States' eyes, and went and bought the S-400s from the Russians. I mean, it's like I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these are all self-inflicted wounds. He didn't have to do all of this. I think he's banking on all of these things, trying to help him to secure Russian agreement to his concerns about northern Syria. But this is only a small part of Turkish strategic interests, or Turkish foreign policy, or Turkish interests in general. I mean, the most important part for Turkey is the relationship with the European Union and the United States and NATO. So, he sacrificed a whole bunch for a relationship with Putin. And everybody knows that Putin has no friends. Putin does not want friends. Putin just simply charges ahead, does whatever he wants to do, without necessarily caring about Erdogan or anybody else. So this is why I'm saying it's the cards that he played, the different maneuvers that he's done since the Russians entered the war in Syria have really been very, very badly made, and he should not have done them. Now he's paying for it, and I don't know if. Yes, they are building his nuclear whatever reactor, but it's Rosatom is not going to be really doing his bidding. Rosatom is going to be representing the Russian government. After all, that thing is practically owned by the Russians. I mean, and operated by the Russians. And I read something somewhere that the building for the reactor, I mean, the cement is breaking up or something. I mean, there are faults in the building itself. So I don't know what he thinks he's doing by cooperating so much on such strategic, very, very important strategic interests with the Russians.
Historically, Turkey has been working so hard for so long to be taken seriously by Europe, to be a part of Europe. Is it a sense, Imad, that the Turkish elite are so frustrated that the Europeans wouldn't treat them as equals that, in a sense, they've cut off their nose to spite their face?
Yes, I do not deny whatsoever that the Europeans have had, feelings of not necessarily hatred, but they're better than the Turks. I mean, the Turks, after all, are these Easterners, and they're uncouth and uncivilized. But this is the old European thing. But at the same time, we also have to look at Turkey itself. What did Turkey try to offer the European Union? I mean, yes, the Europeans are racist or whatever you want to call them, but yet at the same time, the Turks did not do what they were supposed to have done. In other words, I mean, if you can feel that how things changed since the late 80s, for instance, or early 90s, when Turkey was really moving ahead with trying to open up and become a truly democratic society, democratic country, democratic polity. And it ended up with Erdogan, throwing people in jail for demonstrating or for writing, not such a flattering column in a newspaper about him or anybody else. So, the Europeans responded by saying, "Hey, you want to be part of the West? You want to be a democratic country?" So, yes, they were racist, but yet at the same time, he gave them the fodder for that racism. Yes, he counted on them for accepting Turkey into the European fold and opening up and all that stuff. But he didn't do what he was supposed to have done to really accede, for instance, to the European Union. So they are at fault, but he is at fault as well. I mean, he's just as guilty, I think.
So neither of them really got over their historical views. Europe set very high standards, and Turkey didn't meet even the medium standards.
Well, yeah, that's true. But Greece. I mean, at one point, Greece was at the same level of openness or democracy or anything like that as Turkey, right? And Greece, after 1974, started its democratic process, and finally, in the end, it entered the European Union. Yes, Greece is a Christian country; it's not a Muslim country. I understand that, but Turkey was on the way to become a democratic country that would be acceptable for European standards. Not everybody. Bulgaria is not that democratic, honestly. I mean, or Hungary is not that democratic. So, and they are Christian countries as well. So there are comparisons there with the Turkish situation. I don't think the Turks really were, or at least under Erdogan's leadership, were not necessarily very interested in changing the way Turkey was being governed during military rule. I mean, they remained the same. He is now. Nobody dare walk in the street and say, Erdogan is wrong. I mean, he'd be thrown in jail. So where is the democracy in that?
Imad, I'm curious, one country we haven't actually spoken of yet, that is Saudi Arabia, and its continuing interest in what's going on in Syria. Saudi Arabia's position with regard to Idlib, is there a public position that they have touted, or is it a case of them working very, very much in a subterranean manner to affect local proxies to get what they want?
Right. Well, this is a very old. It's a great question, but the answer to it is a very detailed answer. But generally speaking, Saudi Arabia entered the Syrian situation with a very clear vision as to what they want to do with Bashar al-Assad. Basically, topple him, get rid of him, establish another regime that is more friendly to, less friendly to Iran, more friendly to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and the Arab world. And then they had, it's almost like they withdrew gradually. They withdrew. The Arab world, the whole Arab world withdrew gradually from influencing affairs or things in Syria. The latest thing was all of a sudden, the most important thing is to stop Turkey from doing what it's doing in Syria. The Arabs never spoke, Saudi Arabia never spoke anything about, the Russian influence in Syria. Only Turkey, because Turkey is Erdogan and Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood. That's how they understood it. So they're worried about the Islamist influence there. So Saudi Arabia today is against what's going on there because Turkey is doing it. Saudi Arabia is secretly assisting the Syrian Kurds to try to destabilize Turkish policy in northern Syria. It has a lot of help from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and even Egypt is involved in trying to destabilize the Turkish role in northern Syria. The Arab League, when Turkey got involved in Syria, the the latest round about 3 months ago. The Arab League voted against, Turkish role. We don't want Turkey to come. This is really invasion of violation of territorial integrity and all that stuff. So, which is it's all fine. Problem is they really have no influence whatsoever, hardly any influence on affairs in Syria. Now today, after the animosity with Erdogan, as far as I'm concerned, they are very well ready to reopen relations with Bashar al-Assad, to recognize him again as the leader of Syria, readmit Syria into the Arab League, and have full diplomatic relations. We do know that the UAE and Bahrain, since 2019, they opened their embassies in Damascus. Algeria has relations with the regime. Just now, Khalifa Haftar from Libya, all of a sudden he decided that he is the leader of Libya and reopened the Libyan embassy in Damascus. The Egyptians are very, very friendly with Bashar al-Assad and his people. So Oman is very friendly. So Syria is coming back into the Arab fold, but under basically the principle of, Assad is still the president of Syria, and let's let bygones be bygones, and let's forget that he killed 500,000 Syrians and destroyed the country. So specifically because now they have no other option except this, because Russia is in control. Iran has very, very good interests there, and they really cannot influence events in Syria at all.
Has this had any noticeable effect on how Gulf countries are sort of coming together? We've spoken before about the split between most of the GCC and Qatar. Now, has this now been solved, breached in some way that we're not quite clear on? How does this work?
I don't see it as to have been solved. It has not been solved. Qatar still does not have open relations with them. There are things here and there that happen. Some meetings happen, and then all of a sudden, you feel that there is optimism that this thing is going to be worked out, and then all of a sudden somebody says something, and everything goes back to normal. With the normal of boycott. I don't think they have really changed that position. I think the position, the things that started this whole thing are still there. And those things are absolutely nothing. In other words, there was no reason for the Gulf crisis to start. And until now, nobody really can understand how to solve it, because there were no things that started the thing, except that Saudi Arabia and the UAE decided that Qatar is not doing exactly what they wanted to do, and thus they boycotted it. The same condition still holds. Qatar is still not doing what they wanted it to do, and they're still boycotting it.
COVID-19 is something that has dominated international headlines now for weeks, and for very real and, dare I say, existential reasons. Now, this is obviously an overlay on the strategy of the Middle East as well. We've seen that some senior Iranian figures have been brought into the COVID-19 orbit, and it seems to be affecting Iran quite significantly. We don't know what the effects are in the broader Middle East as yet, because most of the countries are not open and free societies. But we can imagine that there'll be a really tragic effect moving through the entire region. How is this going to actually affect the gamesmanship going on in a place like Syria, where you've got refugee flows into Turkey? Those refugee flows may have a follow-on effect into Europe. I mean, this is almost like a biosecurity hazard on top of a conventional war.
It is, it sure is. This thing is not going to be pleasant for anybody there. Latest reports I read was in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa region, there are upwards of like 16,000 different infections with the coronavirus. Deaths are, Iran, I think, surpassed probably the 500 mark. There are up to 10 or 12 or something like that. But Iran is the biggest place where that is affected by the virus. But in the Syrian situation, the Syrian government has not yet announced that there have been any infections. But I don't see that Syria really is totally immune from being infected. I don't think there is any country outside of Africa that has not been affected at all by the virus. And it's doubtful that the refugees who are in northern Syria, refugees who are in Turkey, are totally immune to it. They're not immune. After all, they are in very bad socioeconomic situation, and their health is really deteriorated after so many years of being out. So yes, these people are going to be a danger to themselves and to all the communities that they enter. Now that I think the WHO, the World Health Organization, has just decided, I think 2 or 3 days ago, to start testing among Syrian refugees in northern Syria. So hopefully they don't find cases, but it's very far-fetched that they won't.
No, just that I imagine this is going to result in the Greek border even being more secured, which gets the Europeans used to the idea that that is absolutely and categorically the edge of Europe, and Turkey is the beginning of the destabilized Badlands, which can only be bad for Turkey and an opportunity for Russia.
That is so true. I totally agree. Yeah, that's right.
Imad, are there any final comments you'd like to share with us?
Thank you very much for hosting me, and I certainly hope that things in the Middle East and in Syria will get to a better situation. I believe that the Syrian people do deserve to have a good, open, and uncorrupted society and state, and I hope that peace will prevail.
Inshallah. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify, and please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Also, if you would like to support Strategicon, remember to check out our merch page. We have a wide variety of items to keep the Strategicon listener satisfied. Until next time, goodbye.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.